Question about water resources in Africa. What is what's the capacity to irrigate sustainably using the water resources that you had marked in the yellow part of that graph of Africa? How intense and how long could that go on?
Well, Africa, one of the reasons the Green Revolution didn't take off in Africa is because of the heterogeneity of the continent. Much more heterogeneous environment than Asia. And I can only speak in general terms which are, you know, inherently inaccurate. But the Sahel, you have, basically when you look at those maps on CNN, you see the dry part that's on the bottom part of the Sahara. You'd have to be very careful and measured in your use of water there. Then the middle part, where the Congo River is, there's very abundant water resources. And in the south, again, it's dry. So your question is a good one, but it's impossible to answer. It's very much, like I say, location dependent. And, you know, the hope is that you manage the water in individual watersheds well enough so that you don't begin to, you know, dry up everybody's village water supply and create conflict among pivot users. There's way more water available than is being used, however. That's a generalization that's true.
So in terms of the elevation, field slope, what's the latest development now? It seems like I'm seeing farmers in Nebraska more and more on steeper slopes. Is that just themselves tinkering with the pivots, or have you guys developed any new approaches to field slope?
Well, Mark mentioned that we can easily accommodate a 15% slope. And once you get over 15% slope, it's very hard to keep a tractor from tipping over. So I think I've seen farmers do 20, 25% slopes, but it's risky just putting mechanized equipment on those type of slopes. No, we're not doing any more research on doing larger slopes than that.
And one other technical question, the pumping, sometimes these wells are very deep. These places you're working in Africa, how deep are they and how expensive is the pumping cost?
Well, yeah, the deeper you go, the higher your pumping costs. And 90% of the energy used in a center pivot installation is for pumping water. Now, it's a very, very small power usage to actually run a machine because they use fractional horsepower motors. It's 0.6 horsepower per span. Usually, I use a rule of thumb that if you're over 300 or 400 meters deep, then it may not be economical to pump that deep. Now, in Africa, 90% of the water sources are surface water, not groundwater. And that's not because it's not available. It's because historically nobody looked at groundwater in Africa. If you don't see it, you don't believe it's there. But I see groundwater being more extensively in Africa than it has in the past.
Would you have a ballpark cost for pumping an acre inch or an acre foot of water from whatever depths might be coming?
I don't have that in my head, but yes, we could probably provide something like that.
I mean, are we talking $5, $10, or $100 per acre inch? Or would you?
I don't think an acre inches anymore. I've been in international too long.
Okay, sorry.
But
okay.
Usually if the cost per cubic meter is more than 5 cents, it's uneconomical, if you can compute that. But 5 cents is usually the limit.
I've got a couple of questions. The first one, in terms of the spare parts for the farmers. I've seen a few valley, pivot equipment systems in Africa. Do you have like local dealerships in each country in terms of the support, the backup support that will be there for the farmers? Mm-hmm. Is it per country or is it in certain countries? Because I've seen certain cases in the past where, say, the farmers, they could be in Mozambique and they have to order their spare parts, say, from South Africa. Mm-hmm. And by the time the spare parts get there, it could take a few weeks for them. What sort of setup do you have there in the test countries, at least, where you are having the case studies? And the second one, in terms of the marketing arrangements, I heard you saying, in one case, there's an international, maybe institution who is involved in the marketing arrangement. And to me, it looks like it's a certain version of contract farming that you're talking about. And I've seen a few contract farming arrangements where by the time the produce is marketed, there are plenty of middlemen in between and very little in terms of the income will trickle down to the farmers who actually signed for the loan. Can you comment on that in terms of the marketing arrangements, a bit more?
Okay, well, I can probably answer the ones about service coverage and dealerships. I think we have around 60 dealers in Africa, about 20 in South Africa, because that's the largest concentration of center pivots. But I think there's 54 countries in Africa, and I think we cover probably 3/4 of those countries with dealerships, because we produce about 15,000 pivots a year. It's impossible for the company to cover that without a dealer in between us. But normally in Africa, we can give 24-hour service in most places, in 90% of the places in Africa. That's not really turned out to be too big a concern because these machines are quite dependable. It wasn't the fact 50 years ago. We were happy to make one round around the field before they broke down, but they've evolved since then. And as to payback, Africa has a big advantage over American farmers. That's because in most places in Africa, you can grow 2 or 3 crops a year. In North America, you grow 1 crop a year, and the farmers still pay those machines back in 5 years. In Africa, I know many customers that pay their machine back in 1 year because, one, the crop prices are much higher, and they get 3 crops a year. So they have a steady income throughout the year.
Mm. And in terms of the crops that are grown, who makes the decision?
The farmer makes the decision based on market prices and what his net income would be versus his inputs.
Okay, thank you.
Stanley, could I add something? I share your concern. That's one of the points I was making. This is a machine. And it could easily be used for greenwashing, land grab. We took 10,000 acres, but here's 100 acres, So it's how it's done and who's in control is very, very important. And in northern Ghana, there's certain cotton outgrowing deals that are, they're just not a good deal. So, but what I would contend is this is a neutral technology. Who uses it and how it's used is what matters and is what will shape the outcome.
I have a sort of a follow-up question on the water resources and the sort of long-term sustainability with respect, I guess, especially to the groundwater pumping. I mean, you mentioned, and quite rightly, that groundwater management in the northern part of the High Plains aquifer, as an analogy, is quite good, and there's not excessive depletion going on. But in the southern part, there is or has been historically a lot of depletion. And I guess my question is there monitoring going on of groundwater levels or assessments of recharge rates such that there's a sense of what kind of overall pumping rate is going to be sustainable in any given area given the hydroclimate, so to speak?
No.
Okay.
Let me elaborate a little bit, but even metrologic data in Africa is very scant. And the groundwater resources are very poorly understood. Most of the information, a lot of it comes from colonial data sets, believe it or not, and or research done in the mining industry, where it's sort of, you know, water is discovered because we're looking for gold or diamonds. If I were king, I would begin with surface water resources simply because they're better understood. You can see what you're taking out of the water, out of the river, and if the river is being exploited, you can manage it. I mean, even in the United States, particularly the Southwest, as you know, groundwater management is problematic, you know, which you can't see, you know. So I don't know what will happen, but I would hope that we would rely on surface water resources in the beginning, simply because of the simplicity, or, well, it's still not simple, but greater simplicity, right. Let's put it that way.
There's one person that's been trying to ask a question. Are you sure?
We have, I think, time for maybe one more question, since we have the reception starting up right around now.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the remark by Mark. I want to agree with him that, you know, across Africa, even in some of the studies that I've been involved in, groundwater resources are poorly understood. So that's very true. But all the same, focusing on surface water, I think also the irrigation potential in Africa is very low in terms of, you know, what is being utilized even among the surface water resources. So I think, you know, there's a lot of potential. That would be a good start, starting from the surface water resources, since, you know, there's underutilization anyway for a start. Thanks.